I'm here with two extraordinary people I know quite well. Johannes Galatsanos, who I met about a year and a half ago. He had just left MIT, where he was at the Sloan School, and he has co-founded Diffraqtion. Talk a little bit about your work, and then recently we actually had the chance to meet with Nikos, who is over at Ares, and I think we'll have a longer context because your company has been working on a space for about 5 years, 6 years. So we have a big announcement coming up on that front. So I think first of all, we're in this moment of time. We're really excited to have everybody here at the end of the day. This is perhaps the most consequential period of time we've had for space communication and possibility. And what we're going to be talking about today is not only what's happening at the moment, but speaking about what is possible or almost even heretical in the future. I think we're in the middle of sitting in a spot where we've had Artemis II launched in the US. We've, for the first time in over 50 years, have launched human beings out towards the moon. We're going to see a follow-up on that. We've got SpaceX. The capital markets are humming along, and we're seeing a lot of activity there. Capital flows almost seem like they're getting ahead of themselves a little bit. The technology is sort of lagging behind, but the enthusiasm is well ahead of that. We've got companies like StarCloud, who is new to the scene and is quickly becoming a unicorn and is setting the pace for a lot of innovators in the space. So if we communicate anything today, this moment in time will flash quickly, and you are still at the beginning of something great. And my hope today is that we'll have our founders here talk about what they're building and be able to break down what they're building and think about it within the context of a greater layer of foundational build where there's interconnectedness. So anyhow, enough on me and that perspective, and I'm going to start off with Johannes. If you want to talk a little bit about your company, and then we can dive into it, and then we'll jump over to Nikos.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone, and Kalispera. I grew up in Crete and a little bit in Athens, too, so it's a pleasure to be back. It's actually my first conference back in Greece after founding Diffraqtion. So, yeah, pleasure to see you all. We build quantum cameras, and I brought a little example of that. This is a satellite, in case you have never seen what we call a cube satellite. So you might have seen massive satellites the size of this building, but there are also smaller satellites called smallsats or microsatellites. We built a quantum camera, which is this little orange box down here. That one can see things that a normal camera cannot see, so it can see objects that are further away beyond what we call the diffraction limit. And it can also process this at the speed of light. So it does both the processing and the vision. And what we do, and what this allows you to do, is to make very powerful cameras, and this one goes into space. So the camera will go in many places, but we start in space. This particular satellite, this is a real-size satellite. This is the actual size of it. When that deploys, maybe with Isar or SpaceX or somebody else, and goes shot into space, it will be able to see, let's say, the size of this chair, from which normally you would require a satellite the size of this entire tent. So yeah, we're, as mentioned, Boston-based and MIT spin-out, and yeah, maybe over to you.
Kalispera also from my side. Nikos Perakis is my name. I'm really excited as well to be here in Athens and Panathēnea, so Greek roots as well, born and raised in Athens. I consider also this reimagination of Panathēnea. I can imagine people 2,500 years ago looking at the stars, discussing about other worlds, and we talked about harnessing the power of the sun. We're discussing about accessing space, so I think it's very fitting. So to my person, I'm chief engineer at Isar Aerospace. We are a European launch provider. Essentially, very simple mission. We're building rockets to improve life on Earth. So at this point, you can consider us as the bus manufacturer and bus driver, bringing cargo like Johannes' camera into space. And there is a common misconception that essentially space is restricted to exploration. You might think of astronauts as the first thing, or cool rockets, which is part of the equation and actually brought me into this region or this area of expertise as well. But we oftentimes forget the actual benefits we have on our everyday life. So navigation, for example. Many of you probably used GPS to guide yourself here, or maybe your Uber driver or taxi driver did. At the same time, synchronization of time, bank transactions, disaster monitoring, especially fitting for Greece. So all these applications have a common start point, and this is launching satellites into space, and this is what we're doing at Isar. So we already had our first launch attempt last year, which was a test flight, and we're very, very shortly before our second attempt. Maybe we'll discuss about it a bit later. But our whole premise is building all the pillars necessary for a vertically integrated space economy and space launch vehicle provider. So starting from designing, testing, manufacturing fully, scaling it up, and then owning also the launching and operation, so the entirety of this chain, and essentially building this critical infrastructure of launch that enables bringing mass into space for all these cool and necessary applications from there.
Thank you. Johannes, I want to go back to a point that you were bringing up before. So when we're talking about quantum, it's very hard to conceptualize and sort of really understand the application or even what quantum is about. And rather, we don't really have the time to dive deeply into it. But one of the things beyond the capabilities of the cameras, which I think you addressed, there are unseen variables that I think play into the value of what you're building. And can you talk a little bit about the competitive nature of the industry right now and the cost of delivering equipment into space, cost per kilogram, things like that, and why those issues are important, and why what you're building is 10x or 1,000x better than what's currently available?
Yeah, many questions in there, but I'll try to cover some. So maybe to start with the quantum part, why this camera can see further. It's basically when you normally take a picture with your camera or your phone, you capture light, right? So that takes a capturing of light that becomes an image. Turns out when you do that, you lose 95% of the information of the light. So capturing images is a terrible way of observing the universe. There's a better way to do it. The better way is you extract the information, you process the light directly. And it's kind of a little bit like your eye, like nature solved it. If you ever caught a ball or you went out and you stepped back because a car was coming quickly, that was actually your eye doing the thinking, not your brain, because your eye can process at the edge the light directly as it comes. So using that principle, we process the light directly instead of turning it into electrons, into JPEGs. We can process it in the light and extract the information using quantum theory and quantum systems. Now, that's the basis of why this works. And it took us, as humanity, it took us a long time to get to this. And my co-founder who invented this, a professor between MIT and Maryland, he took about 10 years with NASA and DARPA to develop this technology. Now, why we chose, it's a camera, right? So we can put it in a cell phone, we can put it in a drone, in a car, in a robot, everywhere. But the question was, why in space? And actually, back to your point, space has become accessible and has become a commodity, really. So you can buy, for example, the satellite, this gray box. We don't build the gray box, and we don't build this black either. We just built this. We give it to somebody who gives you this. You can literally go to a website, like you go to Amazon, and you click buy me a satellite, and then 2 clicks later, it's in your office. It's crazy, this one. And we can put in the camera, and then somebody takes it, gives it to, for example, these guys on SpaceX, and then shoots it. And I do nothing in the supply chain. I just pay the people who do it. And this has become very cheap because the launch cost has come down. So for us to even consider space as an application means the launch cost has come down significantly. Without that, this would be way too expensive to ever make a return of investment. So I think that's basically one big point that has now enabled what we call this new space economy to begin with, and allows us to quickly deploy these things into space.
Great. Awesome. One of the things that's curious to me is, again, your company is fairly new, and by 2018 seems like it's decades and decades ago. It seems like every year, every day now seems like it's a year with the level of progress that we're experiencing. And I think Isar's position is really interesting right now because you establish a foundational layer of where you plan to sort of see your role in the world. But I think more importantly, the fact that you have this connection in Germany and this history deeply embedded into Europe. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of having independent launch capability established in the European arena, and why your work in particular is critically important to that?
Yeah, 100%. Maybe I'll touch upon the point of commodity as well, like seeing space as a commodity. Same thing as, internet provider, your data, you don't really care which cable it went through to reach you, but still there are some infrastructures that are so critical that the ownership of them still plays a role. And this is the concept of European sovereignty. We discussed about it also with energy. It's very similar with space. So we are a Munich-based company, but we're not only a German company. We have our launch site in the northern part of Norway. We have test facilities in the northern part of Sweden. So we are embedded in the entire European ecosystem. And although we do understand that there is the option of being dependent to externals as Europe for launching cargo, launching these services into space, this is fine only if you have an option, if you have a choice. If you don't have one and you're dependent on external partners, especially in turbulent periods like the ones we're experiencing right now, sovereignty is the only answer to that. And that starts with the initial critical infrastructure, the bottleneck that every single application from space has to start with, which is the launch, as I said, the bus driver that we are. So that's the foundation. That's what we are trying to enable. And what's very, very important there is no company has been successful or will be successful by launching 3 or 4 times a year, long term. We need to get to this cadence up. We're discussing about all these new applications that we have from space to enable an improvement of life on Earth. And to do that, you need to increase your cadence. So it's not only about proving once that you can fly or twice, doing that consistently, reliably, and at a very high cadence. Now, this is the portion of European sovereignty when it comes to launch facilities. Now, I'm focusing on European sovereignty and not individual nations, because that would be a huge fragmentation. If you imagine, EU, roughly 450 million people, 27 countries, there will not be 27 national launchers. That would be a huge waste of resources. We need to put this together. I do think there are going to be a handful of key players that survive. We see many different actors right now competing against each other, which is also very fruitful. This competition. But not everybody is going to survive that. We're going to have this both on the launcher side and on the constellation side. Again, it would make less sense to have a GPS provider for Germany, a GPS provider only for Greece. I take GPS as an example because we have the European Galileo, which is essentially a navigational constellation. It's going to be a similar aspect with other types of constellations, which, however, doesn't exclude smaller markets, let's say, taking again Greece as an example, to go into niche applications. Again, discussing about fire monitoring, right, or border control. There are specific applications for which Greece should and will build up the expertise to provide these satellites and services. And the most important thing is there is ownership of the end data itself. So essentially what we're getting is not a rocket, that's, again, just a bus. It's not the satellite itself. That's a piece of metal with some electronics, some cooler electronics, we said, with the quantum cameras. But still, it's the data at the end that you own. So you need to build this entirety of the chain with vertical integration to benefit everybody here or benefit national security matters with the data from space.
Can I actually maybe add something on that? I fully agree that it would be crazy to have that many launch companies, 27 launch companies in Europe, right? Yeah. Just the amount of rockets flying over, I don't know, an Aegean island would be crazy. But thinking about the sovereignty part, I think what we have heard a lot of nations ask for is to maybe not on the launch level, but on the payload level or on their own satellite systems. In fact, Greece, I don't know if everybody here knows it, but does have a space program which has already deployed multiple satellites into space already, which are owned by the Greek government, and that one is actually already giving data down to different parties in Greece. And the satellite, so the satellite manufacturers are not all in Greece, and also the payload providers are not all in Greece, and the launch obviously also not, but the satellite itself is owned, or at least the payload is owned by Greece. So we have seen that across multiple nations. I think that has been a very interesting shift that didn't exist even 10 years ago. It wasn't that high priority in Europe to have that. And for us, the interesting part also, another reason why we chose space is because by miniaturizing capabilities for Earth and space observation, we can give sovereign capabilities to multiple nations who want to have that for sovereign reasons.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe one final point, you mentioned this change in regime. We used to have this very strong geo-return policy, right, backed by the European Space Agency, meaning, what is the contribution of Greece, for example, into the total budget? Is it 10%? Then, okay, you're going to get 10% worth of contracts. Which, on the one side, obviously spread expertise also to multiple countries and smaller countries without this infrastructure. but on the other side led to this fragmentation. And having all these interfaces in order to have the political coherence leads to slower speed. And this is also why we are behind compared to competitors both in China and the US. And in order to bring that forward, we need to again come together and have this vertical integration. That's what we are hoping to do as a provider end-to-end, essentially, at Isar Aerospace.
This is as we're sort of just passing through the halfway point, I want to sort of lean a little bit further on the political work, but also talk about the ecosystems for building. I mean, we have people here today who are builders, people who are investors, and I think they want to understand sort of where, again, things are going, how they can get involved with it. One of the things that I've been really taken by as a resident of the U.S. is the capital markets have always been a resource for the United States, and I think in Europe it's not been their strong suit. And I think it plays a really critical role in terms of where we are right now and where we're going. Innovation, however, is really deep here, and it's being surfaced very quickly. These are two Greek founders. They have descendants here. So if you're optimistic about space, you should look here and think, Greece has a great future ahead of it, and many of you hopefully will be participating in that. But the government does also have a role in working along with the capital markets and with commercial enterprise. And one of the things that we've seen in the US is many programs come along, such as the Golden Dome program that was established by the US government. While there's some friction on the research grants to universities, there's a lot of capital flowing through SpaceWorks and Space Force, and through these federal initiatives, along with private initiatives to fund companies. You've been one of the beneficiaries of a relationship with DARPA, which has been around for a long period of time. But can you speak specifically as a US-based founder, what are the resources that you have there? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about Europe and where we are, the possibilities and the challenges working with the government there.
This is a great point. As I mentioned earlier, the quantum camera itself was developed for the last 10 years with NASA, so the space agency we all know and love, and then DARPA. So DARPA, for those who don't know, is the Defense Innovation Unit that does research or gives research grants to universities early for crazy ideas. The main purpose of DARPA is to develop these technologies that can be used across multiple things. In fact, this camera was from the beginning meant to be what we call dual use, so for multiple applications. And DARPA is known for things like the internet. So they invented DARPANet, which became the internet. They invented GPS. So if you ever use navigation, then this is two DARPA inventions that are in your phone right now. So similarly, they fund crazy ideas that come early, right? This was one such crazy idea by a crazy guy who was my co-founder, who wanted to find aliens with NASA. That was his goal. And they funded for 10 years to actually bring this to a stage where you can actually use it. And then it was mature enough, so it went through what we call technical readiness levels, and we reached this technical readiness level 4, which means proven in the lab, but go to the real world. DARPA said, hey, here's some money. They gave us $1.5 million. Take it and build a company. So my professor and I basically sat together and founded Diffraqtion. And with that money, we could set up the initial experiments, the hire initial people, and then raise a larger round, like a pre-seed round. None of that would have been possible without DARPA or NASA funding this. And this was a structure that I think is unique to the US. There has been many, at least in that scale, right? There has been many attempts and now great initiatives to start something similar. So Germany has one. Also, Greece has ELCAC. There was a meeting yesterday here, a little side event where I was a panelist. And there are great initiatives sponsoring such early technologies so that you're not left behind. And I think I mentioned that yesterday at the panel too, which is that I think, generally speaking, if you go to Panathēnea here, you will find the same brilliance that you will find at MIT that I was at. But what really lacks in Europe is how do you find these great people, their great technologies, and fund them so they can grow from like an idea, which was Saikat's idea, TRL0, what we call, to TRL4, which means tested, right? It took multiple millions of dollars and 10 years of funding to get him to this. So how do you build that? How do you find the right people? Also, how do you motivate the people to actually want to commercialize things? So that's another element that I think goes beyond government also towards universities. And I think universities, if you go here, I studied in Germany, I studied in Greece, and in UK, in Oxford, and in America, so I've been in 4 systems, but only in America have I seen this ecosystem of professors searching for people from business schools, hey, let's found a company, and then the government saying, here's some money, you guys go build it, right? This is a unique ecosystem in, I think, Boston and also Stanford, where you went to.
Yeah, that is true. I would add to that. There is a difference there between US and Europe. There are still some initiatives with grants and getting, as you said, from TRL 0, from a conceptual phase to the first prototypes. What I would focus on, again, is dealing with industries which require big infrastructure, big capital investment, which would be a launch provider as well, building all the ground, building all the facilities for manufacturing. Having the government as a customer is indeed, the best of both worlds, because we get this initial fund, but in terms of a service that we are providing, and then the government actually makes use of a future launch, for example. This was also, our first customer was essentially the German government through a competition where we and other startups competed for, getting the first spot into our first launchers. The German government bought that and then distributed that to satellites from universities, which was the best of all worlds, because also the student groups that built these satellites didn't have to pay for the launch themselves. And for us, as a provider, it was our actual, first paid customer. We're using these funds to develop the technology, but still demonstrating that is indeed a need to the German government. And we're also in contact with other governments. We have some discussions for multiple applications, also with Norwegian government for the North Atlantic satellite constellation. So I think having the institutions as well as the actual customer is a big benefit in this early stage.
One of the things that's really interesting right now, sort of tying into this, is that we have SpaceX, which is very prominent, holds a dominant share in their capabilities. The funding of the company is only going to sort of drive a strong market dominance there. When we speak about the potential and power of the future of space, fundamentally it seems like it's a different type of entrepreneurship because there's an interconnectedness. We need to work collaboratively.
Yeah.
And that's assuming everybody plays somewhat nice in the sandbox. And as we know, Elon Musk has always got his own sandbox, and occasionally you find things in the sandbox you don't want to find. But I think he is playing a dominant role here. Do you feel that there are going to be other competitors to SpaceX? Because it seems like their launch capabilities are critically important to the success of other companies. How do you sort of see that playing out, and how do you view the interconnectedness of your companies? I'll give you each a minute because I want to keep we're going to pick the pace up real quick here.
Maybe
I can start, yeah, sure. As you mentioned, SpaceX launched more than 160 times last year. However, if you compare that to European launchers, we had barely 8 of them in 2025. And out of these 160, 2/3, roughly 120, 110, were Starlink launches, meaning they were actually launching their own product into space. Mm-hmm. Now, if you try and book a flight with Falcon 9, like SpaceX actual vehicle, everything's booked out until 2029. And there is still discussions of whether it's going to be continued after Starship becomes fully operational. So yeah, they have definitely demonstrated this increased cadence, and they are right now the backbone of access into space, but the demand is still not saturated. So there is a definite need for additional players. Again, it's going to be a handful of them. It's not going to be hundreds or tens even, but one aspect is fulfilling this demand, which is still increasing. I can talk to you about our backlog. Like, there is actually a lot of people getting to us to go into space. And at the same time, the aspect of sovereignty that we discussed about in Europe, we need to have this fully contained within Europe, full ownership. And it's a point of making a decision. Do we just want to be the customer of this application or the owner of that? If we want to be the owner, we definitely need a competitor also in the launch business, which we're hopefully fulfilling.
Awesome. Johannes?
Yeah, for us, that's part of our supply chain. So for sure, you want to have multiple people in your supply chain, that you can have options, right? Having a monopoly effectively with SpaceX today is obviously not great for end customers. That being said, SpaceX does have a massive amount of launch capability, and they kind of invented the whole domain, right? Before that, it was government doing launches. It was not a commercial entity that you could just hire easily, right, and work with easily. So obviously they have kind of defined that whole space, and that is also the reason why we can even do this in the first place. That being said, again, diversification is great. And of course, SpaceX is not just a launch, right? There's Starlink, there's Starshield, there's other applications that you have in there. And yes, they do use it mostly for themselves at this point. I think it will change in the future. But many of these capabilities, you want to have them with different payloads like ours. But also sometimes you want to have different orbits. Like this satellite is designed for low Earth orbit, which is 500 kilometers above us, and it orbits the Earth. But there are different orbits. So I think you guys do a little bit slightly different orbits in low Earth orbit. So you can choose a particular orbit how you want to go. But then also you want to go to medium Earth orbit or geostationary orbit or even to the moon. So all of these different orbits need different rockets, and there's different suppliers which will fit these niches for smaller payloads, larger payloads, different orbits. So I think there's space for a lot of people, for us to choose.
So it seems China's its own thing, and Europe is sort of building into a powerhouse itself. The US and other areas around the world seem like they're all going to be stepping into this. As you look at this moment in time and think about how do you create a durable position, a sustainable position of value in this food chain, what are you most optimistic about? What are you excited about in terms of whether it's quantum, whether it's something specific? How do you sort of establish a technology and a structure that allows you some presence and persistence in the space? And Johannes, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the kind of a bit of blessing and curse is we're the first ones to build a quantum camera. It was invented literally by my co-founder. So there will be others that will pick up that space. I'm actually kind of excited more people will start building these things. And we will have some good competition and learnings from each other, bringing a completely new device like this. But I'm mostly excited about it in the sense of, I think often like the first transistors were built, nobody thought, the inventor of the transistor didn't think we would have cell phones that we will Instagram or chat with each other or send YouTube videos or whatever. People didn't know that at the time. So in a similar sense, I'm very excited about what people will do. We know we chose space for multiple reasons to start, but I think the camera will be applied in so many things, from drug discovery to finding aliens to finding preventing forest fires here, which also in Greece, helping with disasters. So yeah, I'm really curious and excited about what people will do with this.
Nikos, what about you? Things that you're particularly excited about and companies?
For our, let's say, for our industry and our product, I'm very excited to making it as boring as it can be, because it has to be something that reliably works, is produced at a mass scale, and make the design as simple as possible. So the best part is no part. The best process is no process. So really looking forward to the point where we've proven access to space, done so reliably over multiple times. And obviously, the journey doesn't stop there. There are going to be other endeavors after that, other products. However, the main goal is getting there. It's not easy. I mean, there is a reason why we say it's rocket science. But we need to get this point where it becomes as unsexy as it can be to make sure we focus on reliability.
It's amazing. One of the things that I've had about 1,000 students come through my class at Harvard Business School, and I work with founders, and all the time I remind people, you start something with the idea that you have clarity about what it's going to be in the future, and very rarely does that company actually turn out to be that. I think being able to sort of, using a metaphor here, being able to use your diffraction energy and focus in very clearly on something and then step back to my other friend here at a higher level and sort of observe your work and continue to move between creation and execution and sort of move through that process going forward is critically important. So we're at time. I'm grateful, I know we all are, for your presence here today. Thank you.